I'm Arlene Stein. You're here because of Terroir Talk, but we're also here because of these two fantastic ladies who work in wine, are very committed to the idea of working as purely as possible with agriculture and nature, viticulture, and the production of wine. And we're going to talk a little bit about how wine is a natural thing, and how we can best support agency and producers that are actually working in harmony with that. And so I'm going to turn it over to Charlotte Horton. She's from Castello de Potentino. We did a terroir talk, which Emily joined us with a couple years ago, in the middle of Tuscany. Sadly, we can't travel. On the flip side, one of the benefits of this pandemic is that it still allows us to connect through these mechanisms like Hop-in or Zoom or online. So I'm happy to have you here again, Charlotte. Always happy to have a conversation with you. Do you want to tell everybody a little bit about yourself and what you do at Castello de Potentino?
Okay, Castello de Potentino is a very, very old structure. We think that it probably has Etruscan foundations. So that's probably about 3,000 years ago there was something here. We believe that people were making wine and producing olive oil at least 3,000 years ago here. We have found some ancient winemaking stones down the valley, which really attest to that. We're still making wine here, which I think is really interesting because you're looking at an uninterrupted, continuous tradition, which I'm very proud to be just one little part of, because can you imagine how many people have been making wine here for over 3,000 years? So I'm very proud to be part of that continuum because I think that the evolution of the way that we've made wine is definitely a continuum. The castle itself, the first written mention of it is in the 11th century. We certainly know that the valley around it has a very particular microclimate, and that's possibly why the Etruscans were here farming it. We have very cold nights during the summer, very hot, dry days, so extreme changes in temperature. We have wonderful supplies of water, so there's lots of subsoil water, because we are blessed by being under the sacred mountain of the Etruscans, Monte Aniata, which is one of the highest mountains in Tuscany, which is an ex-volcano. So we're looking at this amazing natural environment where we have mixed volcanic soil, extreme changes in temperature, and lots of water. So the valley itself, which is known as the Golden Bowl locally, because it's so fertile, the Conca d'Oro, as they say in Italian, is actually shaped like a kind of bowl, a crucible. So it's kind of like an amphitheatre. And this means that we've got this wonderful concentration of all of this volcanic activity that happened, 300,000 years ago, is blending and concentrating in this wonderful crucible. We also have these incredible influx of hot air during the day and then cold air during the night. So these are really clear environmental reasons why we have vineyards here. So I really am trying to just observe this environment and in a sort of very symbiotic way and very sympathetic way, try to produce a wine that really expresses that. So without thinking, oh, I want to do this with the wine, I'm actually trying to read my landscape and make a wine that tells the story of that landscape and that history.
We're going to introduce Emily Harman now. Emily's originally from the UK, but has been living in Berlin. No, I was confused because I was going to say Australia, but I was like, no, it's the UK. Sometimes I get my Commonwealth countries mixed up, as you know. But she's been living in Berlin, and we've become fast friends here because of her knowledge of wine and her enthusiasm, especially for producers that are doing the right thing. Love the work that she's doing. She's an importer, she's a consultant, and she also has her own wine bar. Emily, do you want to tell us a little bit more about what you do and what VinaLupa is?
Yeah, as Arlene mentioned, I am English, but I did live in Australia, just to clarify that point. But since the late part of 2014, I've been self-employed, and I have a number of different businesses or business ventures that I'm either involved in or that are predominantly mine. So I started VinaLupa first. It's a consultancy agency that works directly with predominantly restaurants. That was the initial, I guess, the initial audience for all my client base. So restaurants, bars, hotels. Coming from a sommelier background before, assisting these businesses with anything related to the wine expertise that maybe they were lacking or needed. Helping them write their wine lists, training their teams to be able to sell the wines, looking at the practical side of purchasing wine, so managing suppliers or advising on suppliers, pricing, profit, loss, how to charge for wine, those sorts of things. So all the things that I guess a head sommelier or a wine buyer would do, but as a consultant, so somebody external to the business. Slowly working more actually with providing educational seminars and collaborative work with different appellations, regions, so Beaujolais, Burgundy, the Rhone, Prosecco, DOC as well. So working with them to provide education about those regions to the London wine trade, particularly. I haven't done that in Germany yet, but I plan on doing that here too.
So just off the top, and we'll start with Emily this time, quickly give us a rundown of why wine? I mean, we know wine is food is gastronomy, it's also agriculture and farming, but we get into these fields because we have a passion about them. But why wine specifically?
Well, I think it just came from early doors working in restaurants and a passion for food. And I think anybody who's passionate about food, who lives through sensory experience and the communal and both, for me, it's the combination of communal and the combination of constantly being able to learn and constantly be able to expand on my knowledge base. And it's kind of, I mean, the topic of wine, it's like the ocean. I'm never, ever going to see it all. I'm never going to know it all, but I want to.
When I started coming to Italy and then eventually living in Italy 30 years ago, I wanted to learn about all the things that the people who I saw surviving on the land, this ancient tradition of making wine, of farming, all these things. I was like, I don't know about that. I really need to learn about it. So I started learning about how to make cheese and how to, how people slaughtered the pigs and made salami and do all these things. And eventually I was like ticking all these things off on my list. And I was like, okay, now I'm going to learn about how to make wine. So I was two old guys up the road from where I was living who were usually drunk most of the time, I have to say. And I said, when you make wine, can I come and learn how to do it and give you a hand? And they said, yeah, come along. And I went, and it was immediate. It was a coup de foudre. When we were making wine in that filthy little old cellar, with both of these old guys completely drunk, I was like, I love this. I love it. It's this real connection with something very ancient, the past, now, the future. It was a connection with land and with the soil, which these people had grown out of and which the Etruscans had grown out of. And that, even now in China, people are making wine. And I was like, there is something about this that our body needs. We need to have this connection with the land, the microbes, the microlife, whatever it is, it's part of us. And it kind of hit me in this really, really strong, visceral way. And after that, wine was what I wanted to do. I learned how to make wine. The family decided that we were going to plant vineyards. I started to make really commercial wine, and I learned a lot instantly. So 30 years ago, I was like, no, we're going to use natural yeast. Only because I had learnt that off the local people. Because basically I didn't know anything about how to make wine in any other way. So it was a blissful ignorance that led me to make what would be considered now natural wine. It's because I learnt it off the local people.
Well, and so we're going to dig right into that about a definition concerning natural wine. And I don't want to get too pedantic around it because we know lots of people who attend these seminars. I mean, we go down this road often. But you just said something that was curious to me, which is that you learned off the people in the villages surrounding you, the difference between being commercial and being natural. What was that difference? And why did you, shift? What was the shift?
Okay, so technically, if you're making wine because your family makes wine for their own consumption, that is a tradition where, let's say, people don't need to create something that is stabilized and repeatable for a market. They make the wine, they know their vines, it's a small amount, it's usually enough that a family plus a few friends would consume over a year. They don't need it doesn't need to travel. It doesn't always need to be that amazing, sometimes it can be. It doesn't need to age, it doesn't need to be bottled, and it doesn't need to be sent off to America or Berlin or Canada or whatever. So, and it has to be made in a certain quantity because you're not going to start a business making 1,000 litres a year. That's very, very small. So, I mean, that's kind of what you, Emily, and I would consume a year, probably. Or maybe a little bit more. So that's the main difference. But what I wanted to do was to completely carry on the tradition of making wine that I had learned from the local people and try to bring it into the commercial stage, let's say, bring it onto the commercial stage. So I think pretty much that's what I've been able to do. But we then need to talk about exactly what that might mean, what it actually is to do that. So I think Emily will have some comments to make now, I'm sure.
Yes, Emily, you have devoted your time in wine mostly to natural wines, I think, most definitely now. So what's your definition? What do you consider natural wine and why is it important?
I mean, it's really, obviously, there is, as we know, the difficulty with it is that there are many different definitions of what this means and everybody's got kind of a different idea of it. And I think I want to start off by saying that one of the misconceptions about natural wine is it's just about the winemaking, because that's what everybody talks about. There's been, over the last few years, so much talk about sulfur. When you have guests coming into a restaurant asking you about the level of sulfur in a bottle of wine, but no comprehension about how that wine has been farmed and how that land has been worked. For me, I'm always like, this doesn't make any sense. So I think for me, and I think, echoing a little bit what Charlotte has said, and I think it's very much the ethos of Potentino as well, that it's the winemaking, but first of all, it starts in the vineyard. So no use of chemicals, which seems really obvious, but it's, no use of chemicals, so that's in forms of fertilizers, pesticides, fungicides, limited use as well of some of the non-chemical products that we use. So for example, copper sulfate as well is used as a preventative against certain types of mold for the grapes. However, if you're in a really wet climate, you're going to be using that a lot, and the more copper going into the soil also isn't conducive to healthy soil. So it's quite complicated, and it's multifaceted as well, with all the different avenues you can take and all the different decisions you have to make or not make. So working that way, I would say also, I wouldn't say limited use of machinery, but obviously, I think remembering a lot of these wines, it's really something that is truly artisan, and that comes from everything being done, or a majority of things being done by hand. And then the way that the wine is treated in the cellar. So, you know, not heavy filtration farming processes, not adding yeast that are going to flavor the wine and make them taste a certain way, not adding sugar to increase the alcohol percentage, not adding acidity to adjust the acidity level. There's all these different things you can do. There's processes that you can put the wine through to really make a wine that actually really doesn't resemble anything like what the base material that you started with, those grapes that you brought into the cellar. And also, if you're doing all that work in the vineyard, of course, it has to be seen through in the cellar. Otherwise, what's the point? Sulfur for me is always a question that comes up. I am really non-dogmatic about that. I think there are many other things that we should be spending our time targeting, and sulfur definitely has its place in the cellar because it's not a negative thing. Actually, it's antimicrobial. It's something that protects wine, and actually sulfur's good for you. It's actually not that bad for you.
It's also a natural substance in many cases as well.
I wanted in almost everything we consume, so it's also mad, but yeah.
So just quickly, because just to clarify, so what are the problems with the more industrial side of winemaking or wine growing?
Okay, so I think this is a really important question because you've got what we call green cement in certain wine areas, where you have no biodiversity and no microlife because you have one cultivation, which are vines. Now, those vines possibly have been placed in, it doesn't even matter where they've been placed. Some of the areas, you know, initially were tobacco growing areas. Mm-hmm. Some of them are woods that have been pulled up. In Suave, I believe some of them were old battlefields, which is a bit more sinister. But what is important is that you get monoculture. So monoculture, we recognize monoculture with intensive spraying and intensive use of chemical fertilizers is not good for biodiversity. So monoculture is recognized as something that is generally pretty damaging to the environment. So that would be one of my main issues, because if people put chemicals into wine that give you headaches and things like that, humans are drinking it, they choose to drink it, fine, okay. People eat a lot of things and drink a lot of things that are bad for them. But for me, the saddest thing is really about our balance with nature and our relationship with nature and microlife, which we know so little about, that we're just sort of kind of going in with bulldozers and, you know, smashing through systems that we just really don't know anything about. So that would be my real bugbear, my hobby horse with mass production of any food products.
So one of the, just to play devil's advocate a little bit, because we have to talk about the human aspect, because of course it's the humans that are turning those grapes that are coming from the ground into wine. And I'm always a firm advocate that, you know, the financial sustainability is as important as the environmental and the societal. And so, Emily, give us a little bit of feedback in terms of, like, you know, how do you take something that is quite largely a commercial product, commercial interest, and make it viable for that person that we talked about, some of your folks in Beaujolais the other night, that, you know, want to go where they want to have an artisanal farm. Like, how can they actually make something sustainable when they're competing against these massive industrial, you know, monoculture like industries?
I think that's through working together as a community, and you definitely see that in the regions and with the producers that are very successful, that work in a more sustainable way. They get together and they support one another. They share practices, they share resources, and they kind of band together and sort of create their own sort of smaller brand. Because as we do know, there are many positives to the PDO and AOC situation, systems, but there are many things that don't actually look after a lot of the small guys, and actually there is like almost no regulation on farming when it comes to viticulture as well. So the only way to do that is by creating your own organizations, and in many cases often your own set of working ethics too. We see this in Germany as well. Some people that don't want to be part of the VDP, they've come together and they put their own stamp on a label, which is their sign of quality, which of course doesn't always help the consumer if they don't know what that means. And also if there's only a few producers using it, but it's a start.
Well, I'm going to say actually, I have a huge challenge with some of those labeling bodies, because a lot of them are revenue generating to begin with. I've had some of the worst wines that are actually certified organic. What is it and how can we aim to change? People don't understand the traceability of product. And this happens all across the food chain, food and beverage chain. So with wine, from what I understand, there are almost 60 different products that can be put in the finished product that aren't on the label. And so
it's actually higher than that, actually. I think it works out over 100.
Charlotte's got a drawing for us. What's on your label, Charlotte?
Okay, those are all the things that can go into conventional supermarket wine. Those are all the things that can go into organic or biological wine. That's biodynamic. And just to promote myself, that's me. Yeah. So that's a pretty clear to me image of the difference. So when people say, oh, they talk about sulfites giving them a headache, it's not, it's all that stuff. Look at that. And that's not what's used in the vineyard. That is just an additives that are not naturally present in the wine that can go into it. So that would be an issue about how one could actually make a definition about what natural wine is. It would only be to make it legal to put this on the label.
Okay, herein is the big question for the natural wine world, is that there is no clear definition, there is no certification, there is no body that controls the processes of it. Why can't we get to that place, and why is the community itself sort of at odds with coming up with a firm...
I think there's so much money involved, unfortunately, in this area of the business, that there is no way that these people are going to want to admit to this, because everyone will want to buy this stuff. So I think it's really that simple. So I think that the whole game that we're running around, people are running around going natural, organic, biodynamic, pinkety ponk, whatever they want to call the wine, is a real red herring. What we need to do is get this on the label like any other food product.
Yeah, I mean, it all comes down. A lot of the time, it does come down to money, and I say money because of its. I think there's also something else to consider. It's of course the larger producers that have a lot more resources and that have a lot more sway with all the different bodies that they report to. That's definitely the case in a lot of the appellation systems. But then also for the smaller guys, they just don't. If you're somebody that has 3 hectares of vines and it's just you and your husband working in the vineyard, and then you hire a few people to harvest, you're in that vineyard every single day. Like, you don't actually have time to be able to be challenging any of this stuff. You just have to get on with it. Like, that's the thing, is people forget this is like a 24/7 job. Like, it's a lifestyle. And, some of these people making these wines are also living quite a simple life. And that's not to say they're simple people. It's just that actually they live sometimes in remote places. They don't have access to, all the things that we would have in the city. And they don't have the money to do that as well. So I think it's kind of a complicated thing, because, we see this in the food systems with everything. I was just sort of having a little bit of a look, about what oversees a lot of the viticulture laws and what allows some of the appellations, and actually nothing is really handled at a local level. That's also part of the problem. there should be like local and community governance over these issues, so people can decide for themselves and so there are equal votes and everybody's voice is heard, but that's not done.
I certainly would say that one of my greatest expenses is the bureaucracy and the pressure on small producers regarding bureaucracy, and the costs of that is ridiculous. I have to employ health and safety consultants, I have to employ this, I have to employ that, I have to. So it's completely crushing for small producers, and that is something that really needs to be looked at, because it does mean that the small producers will disappear into the big octopuses of the big wine companies.
From a cultural perspective, why is wine an important part of our food system and our diet? Like, can you make a justification for why we need these people in our world?
I mean, for me, it's quite obvious, this question, but for those who, I mean, the answer is quite obvious. I think, you know, a lot of these smaller producers are people that are continuing with tradition. You know, I think a lot of people think natural wine is kind of this new, exciting thing that's engaging everybody. And actually, when you look at the practices of these people and the choices that they're making, these are traditional, historic choices. This is part of history. And it's not a complicated, like, we don't make wine any differently to where we did before. It's been fine-tuned, and obviously there's equipment that can help us make better wine. But the process of winemaking and farming actually is like the rudimentary, like it's all the same. So for me, the importance is keeping these traditions alive, supporting people that are working with the land and taking care of the land, that are really being examples of what stewardship means, because that is the job of anybody working in any form of agriculture. You are caretaking something, caretaking a part of the world that you're going to pass on to somebody else. It doesn't remain yours after you're gone. And often a lot of obscure grape varieties we wouldn't still have if it wasn't for these small producers. You know, the diversity, all of the beautiful, wonderful things that we have available to us because of these small people aren't driven by profit. They're driven by passion and curiosity and their own family stories in some cases. You know, like, they're not just planting grape varieties because they're the ones that are going to give them the most amount of sales or the most amount of grapes, and they're not farming them in the way to manipulate them so we can actually try something authentic and true, which for me is the whole purpose I do this job, because that is where the meaning lies.
Yeah, and at the moment, I think, so when we're talking about what is natural to me and how I understand it is you don't destroy the environment that provides for you. So when we're talking about what it is to be human and what it is to be natural, it is natural, and animals don't do it, trees don't do it, plants don't do it. They don't destroy the environment that allows them to exist.
Paul Niddle, who's actually joining us, he's from viniculture here in Berlin, sent me a podcast with a woman, Mimi Castello from Hopewell Vineyard this week. She's in Oregon. And I found something that she said very interesting, especially as someone who's committed to terroir, but also what you just spoke of, both of you, in terms of like shifting cultures based on what happens to a place from the people impact, the human impact. She says, the version of terroir that is emblazoned in my mind, her mind, is the system only uniquely exists in one place. And when we simplify that to wine or agriculture, it limits the potential expression on that place. And I wanted to get your thoughts on that, because I think it's a really unique. So I think what she's trying to say, Emily, is that we can't be ground by the tradition of only one thing grows in one place and it will forever only be that thing.
But that, I mean, that also limits the definition of terroir as well. Because I think terroir isn't just simply the place as well. It's the traditions of that place, it's the people, and it's the impact of the people too. There's a human element to terroir that's never really discussed. It's always focused on this grape variety from this place, and it's not like some of these wine styles, and they came out of the people they're experimenting. So terroir, of course, can be malleable because there's a human impact, and we're all evolving and changing and shifting, but No, I don't agree with that.
So I think she doesn't need to say that it's a system, and I don't think she needs to use the term limit, because I think that those are already, that's, to me, they're both difficult terms. Terroir, in my opinion, means it's a very strange, magical combination of an environment, an organic life, and the human intervention. And it's a beautiful balance. So I've always thought that one of the, if you can plant a vine and you can make wine in an area, it's usually a very good place for people to live because it's got good water, it's got good weather. So to me, it's always a symbol of the balance between the human and nature. So we know that if we can cultivate and we can grow something in a place, we also can survive, and we can build our culture and our civilizations on that relationship.
Emily, where, in your opinion, are the most innovative things in wine happening right now in the world?
I would actually say outside of the EU. Because there is a lot, it's more of a blank canvas. So, I mean, if you look at Australia, for example, it's quite interesting what's happening over there, because there isn't the same kind of restrictions around the appellation system with people feeling or inheriting vineyards where they have to work with certain grape varieties. So it's much more innovative from a creativity point of view. And there's, I would say, like some of the wines that I've also tried from, let's say, the New World, the US and parts of the US. US is very challenging for agriculture. We know that already. But and Australia is they're willing to take risks and break rules. Also, I was in South Africa. I'm like last year. No, that's the year that it's like 2019. And I found that really exciting. They've got old vineyards because the history of winemaking there is 400 years old, but a lot of young producers experimenting and trying out things and having fun with it and not following what they're told that they should follow as well. I think Germany is very exciting right now as well. There's a lot of new producers coming up. There's a lot of new producers that are very outspoken about the way they work. There's a lot of community building between those small producers where they're working together. And there's a lot of exciting new wines. They're really changing the face of German wine.
What are the biggest challenges outside of the environmental ones that you face as a wine grower and winemaker?
So perception is a big problem. And I think sales, and we've touched on the economy, the economies of small producers. So I think one of the positive things at the Terroir event that we had here a few years ago, Eric Archambault spoke about how we all hated Amazon and how awful Amazon was, but that actually what they had done could be piggybacked on and used for small producers, because they had set up systems which, if I can get Amazon, you can get my wine as quickly as I can get some stupid Zara tank top or whatever. So those words stuck in my brain. And when the pandemic situation really started getting bad, I was like, this is when small producers have the chance to get their product out. And this has been the case, and I've spoken to a lot of the small producers. We here at Potentino have survived on that online sales. A lot of the small producers around here have as well, because it has been a great moment to break down that stupid perception that people cannot get small producers' produce.
Well, and Emily, just to ask from your point of view, because you deal a lot with your consumer facing a lot of times, especially in the bar, in the restaurant. How do you get customers to support and buy natural wines?
Well, they don't really have a choice if they come to my restaurant, because that's what's on the wine list. So that's how I do that.
That's
I'm lucky that I'm in that kind of, yeah, I mean, I'm lucky. I take care of quite a few wine lists, so I have the power to make those choices for people in a way. And I think, yeah, that's me. But of course, we have lots of wine training done for our staff and team. So they also know that the wines are made this way as well. So there's a dialogue between them and the guests about this too, which I think is important.
So I've heard actually that natural wines are actually more accessible and more interesting to younger customers because they don't uphold sort of those staunch traditions. Is that something you've noticed and makes people more keen to like actually try more innovative wines?
I would say it wasn't necessarily the wines being natural themselves that do that. I think it's the marketing and the kind of the support of the natural wine scene and all of the events around the natural wine scene, which have allowed consumers in. So historically, a lot of these wine tasting events where we're talking about 2,000-3,000 people events, I mean, even bigger in the case of fairs like Provine, these were always traditionally really for trade people like me.
And intimidating.
Yeah, or some wealthy people that knew the wineries or privileged people that knew somebody that they would have access to these events. And then with a lot of the natural wine fairs, they open these up to the public because it's great to be able to meet a producer and talk to them and have that experience, and also for a producer to meet the person that's buying their wine at the end of the line. So I think that actually had a huge impact on making wine a bit more accessible. I think it's also a lot more younger people working in wine. I think the people filling roles in different businesses working with wine are younger. They're from different classes. They're different genders. It's much more diverse now, the wine scene itself, than it ever was. And I think all of this obviously makes a big difference. Like I remember being 24 and being on a restaurant floor because of somebody had asked to speak to the wine person, and I came over and then they asked me to see the wine person, and I was, it's me, I'm really sorry you're stuck with me, this young girl is here to take care of you.
I'm gonna ask you, Emily, if you can give our listeners maybe 3 of your favorite natural wines that you're drinking right now, or recommendations.
Okay, so Vino Diana Palmento Rosso from Etna. I absolutely love it. It's my go-to juicy, drinkable light red. I mean, in the UK, everyone has access to a lot of these wines. I know that you can find that wine in the UK and in Europe. So that's definitely one. Another one that I like would be the Uvas de la Ira from Dani Landi from Sierra de Gredos in central Spain. Absolutely beautiful. A volcanic Grenache for you, Charlotte, that is. I mean, if it was Canada, I love Pearl Morissette, the Cabernet Franc, especially after like 4 or 5 years of age on it. It's beautiful. So that's what I'm going to throw out there today.
Nice. Charlotte, do you only drink your wine?
Yeah. That's the answer. Yeah.
Okay.
Occasionally I drink other people's wine, but I can't remember what it is.
That's fair. But what I actually wanted to ask you about, because you have a bunch of exciting new products that you've been developing during COVID. Do you want to tell people, other than wine, what other alcoholic beverages that you have that they can get?
Well, everyone's so keen. A lot of young people actually are beginning to drink less wine and drink more cocktails. But I was a little bit bored at the beginning of lockdown, and I'd always wanted to make a vermouth. And everyone was like, my brother made this fantastic gin, which is really delicious with the botanicals from the valley. And I was like, I've always wanted to make a vermouth. And then I thought, why don't I even try to make a sort of Campari style bitter?
Yes, so you're making a Potentino Negroni.
Yes. So we actually had a Negroni kit. So I made the vermouth, I made the bitter, experimenting witch-like in my little kitchen over lockdown, using all these weird roots and things. So it's all totally naturally made with all of the proper herbs and weird witchy roots. And so now we've had it made properly by our distiller.
As a final thought, how can people support sustainable wine practices? What is the best way for a consumer to get behind this movement?
Order directly from the producer.
Or support small local restaurants and small independent wine shops too, if you don't know the wineries to contact.
Nice. Amazing. So again, folks, thank you so much for joining us. Charlotte, Emily, again, always a pleasure to have you two ladies together, my favorite wine ladies.